Hello, good afternoon for those who are in Europe, and good morning for those in the US, and maybe good evening for people on the other side of the world. It's very exciting that we have today here at the webinar on seas, oceans and public health in Europe participants from all over the world. So a very welcome to you all, and many thanks for joining in here this afternoon. During this webinar, we will present the results of our project, the Strategic Research Agenda for Europe. So I would like to give a very warm welcome to our four speakers for this webinar: Professor Laura Fleming, Professor Sam Dupont, Professor Katja Verliepart, and Professor Michael Dupleix, who will introduce to you the SOPHIE project and the Strategic Research Agenda that we've drafted in this project. What I will do now is I will go briefly through the program of this webinar and then hand over the floor to the speakers. My name is Suzanne Wuits. I work for the National Institute of Public Health and the Environment, which is situated in the Netherlands. We work on both the fields of the environment and health, and right now half of our institute is very busy with the coronavirus developments, but I'm sure that many of you are in somehow, some way involved in this coronavirus crisis. For us in this project, it's actually also an advantage because originally we were hosting a conference in Brussels, but that had a practical limitation in the number of participants that we could get there. So now we can reach out to a much bigger audience. So we are very pleased with that bigger outreach. I'll explain to you first the program. One moment, please. There it is. We'll start with first a welcome and introduction, which will be done by myself and by Laura Fleming. And then the strategic research agenda will be introduced to you by the three speakers I mentioned to you already, and that I will introduce further down the line. So this will be a more presenting part, and then we will have an interactive discussion. So as a start, we have set up three questions that we hope that you haven't thought about during the presentation. And that these three questions are: what should be the next steps to take the SRA forward? How can these findings be integrated into existing policy and projects? And who should be informed about the SRA? So what we would like to ask you, if you have any thoughts about these questions during the presentation, or maybe other questions, please chat about it. And in your chat, you can address a chat to the entire audience or to a specific person. But very practically, we have right now over 200 participants. So we expect that it might be a bit of a challenge to filter out in the chats that are being made. So please address to all, so we have the complete overview visible for everybody. By the end of the presentations, I will take these chats and select some of them and address them to the speakers so they can respond to that. And if we have a possibility, we will ask participants if they want to make their comment as well. In a very practical sense, since this is a webinar, you are in the basis all muted, but I can unmute you so you can ask a question whenever that is appropriate. By the clock of 4, we aim to conclude the webinar with some closing remarks, and those will be done by Laura Fleming. And well, I'm here with two colleagues of mine, which are Marit de Vries and Lisbeth Deerven. They will help me to organize the chat. I hope that you won't be too disappointed if your specific question won't be addressed during the discussion, because somehow that is the thing that we are a bit worried about, because it's such a large number of people joining in today. What we will do is that we process the chat in our report, and we will get back to that on the website. And we will also record the presentations by the speakers, and that will also be put on the website later on. And finally, what I also would like to add here at this moment is that also 2 artists are joining in this webinar, and they will give their impressions in a visual way on today's meeting. So that was very practical from the practical point of view. I would like now to get started with the presentation. And for this reason, I will give over the floor to Professor Laura Fleming. Laura is, she is the principal investigator of the SOPHIE project, which means that she runs everything within the SOPHIE project and has the final responsibility for it. She is also the director of the European Centre for Environment and Human Health, and she holds the chair of Oceans and Health at the University of Exeter Medical School. One moment, please. I will now hand over keyboard and mouse to Laura, and I will unmute her. And that's also important for presenting. She's already unmuted. So many thanks, Laura. The floor is up to you.
Thank you, Suzanne, and thank you all, and for your patience with our webinar and our technology. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity for this soft launch of our strategic research agenda for oceans and human health in Europe, which is a major output of the SOPHIE project. I'll be giving a brief overview, but before I do that, I want to just say first that I hope that all of you and your families are safe. And if there's any silver lining to this terrible pandemic, it is the fact that it really highlights how environment and human health, that the health of people and the environment are inextricably interlinked. And I would add that the SOPHIE project is a very good example of how we are trying to explore the interactions between the health of the oceans and the health of humans. So the SOPHIE project, brief overview before I get to the strategic research agenda, was tasked with setting up a network, a diverse network of stakeholders across Europe. And you'll hear more about that network in a few minutes. We are focused, as I said, on the health of oceans and humans. We are tasked with developing this SRA, or strategic research agenda, and creating a legacy beyond the project. I've had the privilege and pleasure of interacting with 7 other colleague partner institutions across Europe who form the SOPHIE consortium. And they represent not only research institutions, but national marine and public health institutions. And we have 3 partners who are SMEs with expertise in the areas of big data and blue tourism. In terms of where we started, Oceans and Human Health actually started in the United States in the 1990s as a new meta-discipline, but we have built on the European Marine Board white paper on oceans and human health that came out in 2013, as well as other activities such as the Euro-Ocean Conference and JPI funding in this area. As I said, we've been creating a stakeholder network, which is using LinkedIn, thanks to GDPR, the strategic research agenda, which the soft launch is right now at our SOPHIE conference, and the ultimate aim is to build oceans and human health capacity and legacy. Over the SOPHIE project, we have tried to listen to many different voices, the public, the general public, but in particular the medical and public health communities and the marine communities, as well as the blue tourism industry and policymakers, all towards creating this strategic research agenda and hopefully impacting future funding. We have done this using a variety of activities and ways of spanning the marine and health community, trying to do it in as transdisciplinary aspect as possible. So we have created a lot of evidence, which is now available on our website and coming out, for example, as peer-reviewed publications and reports. And we did this through a variety of ways of consulting, both online and in person. And I will just illustrate that this particular activities, all this evidence, I'll illustrate only one because we don't have enough time. This particular activity was an evidence synthesis by Drs. Ruth Garside and Becca Short at the University of Exeter. And what they did is they took 18,000 articles which alleged to have connections between marine environment and human health with measurable human health outcomes. And they whittled this down to papers that actually did do this. And the dark boxes are areas where there are papers, there is substantial, possibly, evidence of human health interactions that were documented. However, what you can see and what this kind of mapping is particularly useful for is pointing out areas where there's very little evidence. So I draw your attention to marine plastic pollution and to tourism, where there's almost no evidence out there to date of tangible health outcomes. So I'm now going to focus on the strategic research agenda itself. We, with our expert group, have identified three major areas. The first one is biodiversity, marine biodiversity, biotechnology, and medicine. The second is sustainable seafood and healthy people. And the third is blue spaces, tourism, and well-being. Everybody that we've consulted with has impacted on this list and on our vision, but in particular, 20 interdisciplinary international experts came together twice over the past 2 years in person and also online. They were given a remit, relatively short term, of 2030 for their vision of where the research gaps are and where it should go. And we want to make it clear that this does not define the whole world of oceans and human health. These are just three areas that actually fit the following cross-cutting themes and where there are major research gaps. So they cover both the health of the ocean and people, and as such an opportunity to bring those research communities together. They can link to the SDGs quite easily. They all have several of the following aspects. They bring in equity and equality, sustainability, a global climate and other environmental change context. They will and must involve ocean literacy and citizen science and innovation and employment. This is a diagram from a paper that we wrote around oceans and human health, and it demonstrates the incredible complexity of this area. It was created by Dr. Will Stahl-Timmons, and he called it the tangled net of oceans and human health. We hope that the three areas that you're about to hear from our three experts is a beginning in trying to untangle creatively going forward this complex area of oceans and human health.
Many thanks, Laura, for this very nice introduction of the SOPHIE project and the SRA. I would like to take over now the keyboard and mouse control again and hand over the floor to Professor Sam Dupont. One moment, I'll first, yes. Sam Dupont is an associate professor and senior lecturer at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. He is also an advisory board member of the SOPHIE project, and his main research focus is on the effect of global changes on marine ecosystems. And Sam will introduce the first theme of the research agenda to you. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon, good day to everybody. So I've been asked to champion the first of the three tasks of the strategic research agenda that focuses on marine biodiversity, biotechnology, and medicine. And basically the message is that the vision of the research agenda is that we need two things. One, we need a more targeted approach that would benefit biotechnology, so a more targeted approach of exploring and using biodiversity in the sea. And the second point is that we need to protect this biodiversity for obvious reasons, but also to protect the assets that we can get over there. And of course, biodiversity is at the core of ocean and human health. All the services that the ocean is providing to us rely on a healthy ocean and indeed rely on biodiversity. And this biodiversity, unfortunately, is threatened by all the different pressure that humans are putting on the ocean. And what is really important about the marine biodiversity is that it's really unique. 30% of all the phyla are only marine. And the second part is that is really poorly understood. We still have a lot to explore, and it's estimated that about 2/3 of the marine species are still undiscovered, meaning that there is a mine of potential interesting compound, product, and processes that are available for us. And what is also very important there is that there are potentially a lot of new products that we can find there, and that's something that is extremely needed. Around the 24,000 medicines that are available on the market, only 10 are coming from the marine world, and only 28 are currently under trials. Of course, you heard about food supplement and other interesting properties from the sea, like the green fluorescent protein that are used a lot in science, but there are so much more that we could find up there. And so there's a real need. If we see, for example, the problem with antibiotic resistance, we need an alternative, and maybe the next alternative is present into the ocean. Another thing is that some of the most promising anti-cancer substances are coming from the sea, like, for example, from sea cucumber. But there are different problems with that. First is that the biodiversity is under threat, as I mentioned before. We are facing now the sixth extinction, and all that is, of course, a consequence of human activity. And the data show that if we keep going on the path that we are today, 50% of the marine species will be at the verge of extinction by the end of this century. So we might lose a lot of the potential that is over there. And the second problem is that developing new compound is a very complicated and an expensive process, and also very long. It can take up to 20 years. So that limits the opportunities and the chance that, for example, some companies would take the leap of faith of going into the ocean and explore. So what we propose here in the research agenda is a way to solve these two issues: how to maintain biodiversity, protect biodiversity, and how to identify better what are the interesting substances that we can find into the sea. And for the first part, what really is needed is to better be able to target the interesting species. We can't just go there and randomly sample for interesting species and ecosystem. We should try to find, by exploring the literature and testing hypotheses, or going into the field, trying to understand what are the characteristics of the most interesting species. And it could be because they live in an extreme environment or an interesting environment, because they have unique adaptation or unique life history stages. But we can, if we have a strategy like that, that help us to identify the best candidates to find substances that will limit the risk. So it's really important to keep understanding and mapping the biodiversity. To find this unique characteristic. And the second part is that we need to be sure that we will protect this biodiversity, not to, on one side, to not lose them, but also if we find an interesting compound into the ocean, to be ensured that we will have constant access to it, that we don't find a new medicine against cancer and then the species disappear. So there is a mix of like being able to identify more efficiently the important species, but also be sure that we maintain this biodiversity. And of course, compound and processes are one of the many reasons why we need to maintain biodiversity. So how do we do that? What needs to happen next? First, we need more communication. We need to put together all the different actors and communicate about these issues and work together to make this happen. And the second part, we also need to have a really clear picture of the policy landscape in which we work for this. Be sure that we know what are the opportunities and what are the limitations. And the last part, and not the least of it, is that, again, it's really important to ensure that we're going to protect the biodiversity for itself, but also be sure that we can protect the biotechnology product and application we can have from this. And I just want to end my presentation with this picture. It's a picture that I took during a capacity building course that I organized several years ago in Africa. And on the picture, you can see Jeremiah, which is who is a student over there and taking measurements into the ocean. And for me, that's one of the most inspiring work I can do. For me, it's a message that the ocean is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to communicate. It's an opportunity to share and to connect. And show us that by doing science in the right way, we can really make the world a better place. Thank you.
Okay, many thanks, Sam, for this very interesting introduction of the first theme of the Strategic Research Agenda. I will now hand over the floor to Professor Katja Philippart. One moment, please. I will hand over the rights to Katja right now. Oh, I'm sorry. First, yeah. Professor Katja Philippart. She's the lead investigator of the Institute NIOS in the Netherlands. It's the National Institute on Research on the Sea. And she's also an associate professor at the Utrecht University, and she is a member of the expert group of the SOPHIE project. Katja, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Hello, everybody. I was asked to elaborate a bit on action number 2, sustainable seafood and healthy people. And I'm trying to get the next sheet, which is not working. It took a bit of time last time when we practiced. Yeah, there it is. So what is the vision of the project on sustainable seafood and healthy people? That is two sides of the coin. So one side is the consumers, so the people who eat fish and seafood, and it should be healthy, nutritious, safe and accessible to all. And the other side of the coin is the people who harvest or rear the product, and so the fisheries and the aquaculture, and the idea that it also should be sustainable and safe for the people to work there. And why sustainable seafood and healthy people? Why does it gain more and more interest? And one of the reasons is that our populations are rising and the pressures on food security are increasing. So we need more food, and everybody is looking more and more to the ocean, because the ocean might supply a solution for this. And one of the reasons is that fish or seafood are known being nutritious and being healthy. And we do know that healthy and diets can prevent disease, which is very important if we would like to stay healthy as people. And then we also, if we have the right conditions, we should be able to sustainably manage this food provisioning sustainably, not only for the safety of the food itself, but also the safety of the environment. And what do we need to know to make this vision true? So one of the things that is happening, that we cannot only rely on our experiences we had the last few decades, because we know things are changing with respect to the environment. So pollution and climate change being two of the very important things that are varying and might have impact on the food resources. And one of the things is the carrying capacity of the seas and the oceans. How much room is there still? What is the space to operate to harvest additional food and harvest also food that we rear? And how does this balance with respect to the natural values that we also would like to conserve? And what we see for expect as the impact of climate change is we see this geographical changes in distribution. So on average, fish and other animals and plants that we eat slowly migrate to the poles, meaning that they go from one country to another. And how do we adapt to the changes that we see happening and that we expect to happen with respect to this change? And another thing is that not everybody eats seafood. So how willing are people? If we are able to supply more seafood, are people willing to eat it? And if not, are there ways to convince people to at least try to eat the food from the sea? And the last aspect is, how do we make sure that these natural resources are equal and sustainable for all? What needs to be happen is that one side is there need to be changes in policies. So it's the oceans are, and the ocean and the seas are all interconnected, meaning that we have to have a global policy on how to deal with fisheries and aquaculture. And then more locally, often we also have to make sure that we link the different policies between fisheries, food security and health. And there are also some scientific questions that we have to deal with. So what does the additional harvesting of food from the sea means on natural values, and how can we reduce the impact as much as possible? And what does environmental change means for food security and safety. And last but not least, we need these transdisciplinary training opportunities. And this is also illustrating by this picture that I would like to share with you. This was a summer school, and what was done here, we took young students to the sea, into the field, and they were taught about the natural ecology, but also about aquaculture. And what was so interesting to see was that they also really were teaching themselves amongst us. They had very extended discussions also on the future of the world. And I think this is the way forward, to have this group of people ready to face the new challenges that are ahead. Thank you.
Many thanks, Katja, for this introduction of the second theme of the strategic research agenda. For the third theme, I would like to now give the floor to Professor Mike de Pledge. Mike de Pledge is an interdisciplinary research scientist and policy advisor with a diverse expertise on the threats from the environment to humans and wildlife, and the potential of natural settings and resources to foster a better health. And he is also a member of the expert panel of the SOPHIE project. One moment, please. I will hand over the rights to you now, Mike, so you can take over the keyboard and the mouse. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Can you now hear me, I hope?
Yes,
so it falls to me this afternoon to tell you about the theme of work that's been conducted on blue spaces, tourism, and well-being. I'm just trying to proceed to the next slide, and here we are. And really, the object of this work is to try and look at the interactions between people and the coast. So what exactly are we aiming to achieve? What is our vision in taking this forward? Well, the first thing we want to look at is how we foster improvements in physical health and well-being by the use of blue spaces as a resource, and really ensure that we get the maximum benefit out of this environment. But at the same time, it's extremely important that we look after this environment and don't flood it with many people who may not be aware of the damage that they could do to coastal environments and to the resources that are available there. And it's also important that we handle these interactions with the coastal zone in a way that doesn't damage the other ecosystem services that we might get from coastal environments. So why blue spaces, tourism, health and well-being? What are the actual issues that we're really facing at the moment? Across Europe, health is deteriorating, and it's ironic to be able to say this at the moment with the coronavirus epidemic that's sweeping the world. And clearly, the better health that people are in initially, the more likely they are to be able to survive this terrible burden of an infectious disease. And there will be other infectious diseases coming in the future, so it's important that we maintain and foster the health and well-being of people to make them more resilient. But as it turns out, 77% of the burden of disease in Europe is caused by non-communicable diseases such as obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, respiratory disease, strokes, and that kind of area. And in fact, 1 in 4 people in Europe, sadly, will experience mental health problems at some time. So anything that can be done to ameliorate this burden is very important. So blue spaces can be linked to improving health. And as you'll see in the report, in the strategic research agenda, in the reviews of evidence, there are numerous publications and reviews which point out the evidence already available that spending time in blue spaces is beneficial for health. This has knock-on implications for health costs across Europe. And indeed, it's estimated that 600 billion euros are spent just on treating mental health in Europe. So, as I said, getting these people into these environments, it's vitally important we avoid environmental damage. We don't want people leaving behind plastic bottles or introducing chemical pollutants and waste into the environment. We don't want cruise ships delivering air pollution to coastal zones, and we don't want water sports damaging delicate environments and so on. I'm just having a little bit of trouble advancing the next slide. There we are. So in terms of what people do about their interactions with the oceans, how do they behave? It seems to be rather an inconsistent picture, and so it's very important that we really provide education and increase awareness about the risks and benefits of the coastal zone. So what do we need to do now? What do we need to know? What are the positive impacts of blue spaces on health and well-being? How can we maximize the benefits while mitigating the environmental impact? And how do we make health-based blue space interactions sustainable? So these are the key issues that we'd like to take forward. So what needs to happen next to make this happen? Well, we know quite a lot about some of the interactions of people with the marine environment. For example, there are 335,000 boating accidents each year, and 40% of the people involved in those end up needing medical care. But we know far less about the impacts of pollutants and pathogens in recreational spaces and their impacts on health and well-being. We need to explore integrating ocean literacy. That's an understanding of the marine environment and all the organisms and ecosystem services we get from it into the tourism and citizen science matrix. We need to get people to really become increasingly aware. And finally, it'd be very helpful if we could create a forum and a platform for creating solutions, co-creating solutions in different areas of society with these in these problematic areas. We do seem to have policies that link human health, well-being, and the economy, and we do have policies which link the marine environment and the economy. But what's missing are integrated policies that link human health and well-being with the marine environment and the economy. Finally, I just wanted to present this picture, which is of the Scilly Isles, 25 miles off the southwest coast of Britain, where at a low tide during the summer months, the area between two islands is completely exposed. You see the seabed there. And on this particular occasion, a jazz group created a pop-up jazz festival, and people trooped out over the mud, seeing what was on the surface of the bottom of the sea, and then had a very enjoyable time listening to jazz and drinking gin and tonic. So I think this is a very good example of blue spaces, tourism, and health and well-being. Thank you.
Many thanks, Mike, for the introduction of this third theme of the strategic research agenda. The gin and tonic brought a smile on my face, maybe also with other participants. I would like to hand over the floor now to Laura in a moment, but I would like to remind the audience on their possibility to use the chat function for asking questions. And if there are already specific questions to specific speakers, we will send them through to those speakers so we can get started after this with the discussion. And there are already some questions for Katja, so Katja, maybe you can have a look in the meantime as well. I will now share, one moment, share the keyboard with Laura again. Laura, the floor is yours. I will mute now.
I hope to summarize very quickly. There we go. So first, just thank our three expert speakers. And in terms of conclusions and recommendations, this is a strategic research agenda. So our top line recommendation is that there is interdisciplinary international funding needed from diverse sources in this area if it's to go forward. And it must involve interdisciplinary work or transdisciplinary work across the medical, public health, marine and environmental science communities, something that to date really hasn't happened. And it must be accompanied, as has been said by all three speakers, with transdisciplinary training, because this will be the true legacy, a group of people who really are trained and able to deal with the complexity of oceans and human health going forward. And part of their training and part of the work going forward must be co-creation and engagement with diverse communities, including businesses, NGOs, and governments. I would like to highlight that we have a very good website, a SOPHIE website, and the Strategic Research Agenda is available there. And not only that, we've created a toolbox, thanks to Carrie Hall and others, that will help any of you who want to help us get the word out. And also, we would love it if you, thinking of what oceans and human health means to you, especially those of you who are literate on social media, we would love it if you would share a photo, a poem, a piece of art, or music using the hashtag SOPHIE, SRA, all caps, to help us get the word out about our SOPHIE project, but especially our strategic research agenda. We also have a LinkedIn group, thanks to GDPR, which is our current network. And you've seen a number of images from our wonderful expert speakers, and these are the kind of things that we would love you to spread around as part of our social media messaging. And this is my personal contribution of what Oceans and Human Health means to be. And it's a picture of my daughter when she was a child in a beautiful part of the United States called Maine on the coast. And to me, it represents, as several of us have already noted, the future legacy of Oceans and Human Health. And I'll now turn it back over to Suzanne to run the interactive portion with our thanks.
Many thanks, Laura. I will take over the keyboard again. It takes some time for me as well, I think, to switch over. Yes. These are the questions that I've pointed out for you at the beginning of the project. And I understand that there have been put forward some questions already, so we'll come up to that in a few minutes. But first, I would like to recap for you these three questions. What should be next steps to take the SRA forward? How can these findings be integrated into existing policy and projects, which was also mentioned as something that should be done by all three speakers, but maybe you have some suggestions on how this should happen and who should be informed about the SRA. I would like to ask the speakers to switch on their cameras so we can see them all. I will switch on mine as well. You're already there, and I'm there as well. And what I understood already, there's a question for Katja from Marcel Jaspars. What about the safety of seafood? Is this in particular the bioaccumulation of toxic metals and other toxins? Katja, could you give a response to that question?
Yes, I can. Thank you for the question. It's a very important one because the idea is that if you, for example, with respect to aquaculture, it would be most feasible to have it close to the shore, but that is probably the areas that are most polluted. So when you map the areas where you think it's feasible to have aquaculture or collect your fish, you should really take local pollution into account. And he's talking about toxic metals, for example. We also are worried about pharmaceuticals and other things. It could also be toxic algae. So you should have a continuous screening if you try to rear something, and the alternative is to go to the open sea, but it's far more difficult to have infrastructure there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Katja. I also have a question for Sam from ISKI Britain. What about the inclusion and integration of local indigenous knowledges and practices that are already acknowledge the sea as a medicine? These voices are often consistently marginalized and excluded from decision-making processes. So that is quite a big question, I think, Sam.
Oh, thank you. And actually, it's a very valid point. And one of the points we try to make is that there's very little known actually in how to target more efficiently what species, what ecosystem are potential interesting resource for medicine. and that would require communication with any important persons who actually have a say into this. And you're right, these people, this indigenous knowledge is extremely important as a way to maybe refine a little bit and simplify the research of the scientists. So that would be an interesting collaboration between scientists and citizens, like a beautiful example of that. So I think it's a really interesting option actually to explore. So combining science, knowledge, and try to work together.
Okay, so you think that the scientists should reach out more to the local communities? Is that what you're saying, or is that?
In general, that there's a lot to learn from communication across discipline, and that's, I think many scientists are really moving into that direction. The problem is sometimes that it's difficult to find the right language. It's difficult also to find the time for these things. But as I said, like it's really inspiring to see like how actually people are willing to actually work across discipline these days. And that would be a good example of cross-disciplinarity at its best, if we actually go to the people, talk to them, and learn from them. So involve them into the creation of new knowledge.
Yeah, okay, thank you. But and the other side of the medal, because once you have the local communities, how to reach out to the European level, the decision-making level, is that something that you have your ideas on?
I would say that one of the problems we have, I always speak from the scientist point of view, is that we tend to have this one direction communication, and actually it should be seen as a platform where all the actors has a chance to talk in both directions. And that would work for citizens, that would work for policymakers, that would work for everybody. And that's really the challenge, is like we're not supposed to do this science supply paradigm where we create knowledge and communicate it, but rather like listen to all the different actors at the same time, and then together build the platform needed for the new knowledge. I'm not sure if it's exactly what you wanted to hear, but maybe Mike would answer that a little bit better than me.
Well, I just wanted to hear your view on it. So everything, whatever you said, is all right with me. But I think it's very interesting, such a platform, because it would really enable different levels and scales to discuss with each other, and also bring in the local knowledge and the special local aspects. Mike, I have a question for you as well, and also from Iski, and she's asking what lessons could be learned for the Oceans and Human Health SRA on how the health of the environment, ecosystems, and other species, especially cleaner waters, seems to be doing much better in our absence. So where does that leave our ambitions for health and well-being for humans?
Well, so I think Iski makes an extremely good point. It's very clear from abundant evidence from around the world and over a long period of time that in the absence of humans, our marine ecosystems recover very rapidly indeed, actually, following various wars that have happened in coastal regions where people couldn't be near the coast any longer and where industrial activity was reduced, then the marine environment recovers. So, but the fact remains that more and more people are living by the coast, and people like visiting the coast. So there's some sort of trade-off between where people want to be and the amount of damage that we're willing to accept in the marine environment. My argument, I guess, is mainly that we should tread more lightly on the seashores, in the sense that we should be aware of the damage that large numbers of people in confined groups and small groups can do in local areas. And so it's about increasing public awareness, which is very, very important. It's also about perhaps coming up with policies that are much more effective in protecting the environment. So one of the things that I think is up for debate, and indeed should be debated across Europe, is we have very many measures in place to reduce the release of microbes into the marine environment, sewage and what have you. And also we have very rigid restrictions on the use of environmental chemicals. The REACH process that some of you will know has been very important in doing that. And yet nonetheless, as Sam has pointed out, biodiversity in the marine environment is under severe threat. So these measures are not being incredibly effective at the moment. We still have this relentless decline. So part of the answer, I think, to ESKI is that we have to compromise, we have to find trade-offs because there will be some damage, but we need to be an awful lot more careful in what we release into the environment, intensify our recycling efforts, move forward with green chemistry, and think more carefully about the coastal zone damage that we do through building and hotels and harbours and a range of other things. So I hope that goes some way to answering the question.
Okay, thank you, Mike, for this answer. It raised a question with me, actually, when you gave your answer, because I sometimes think that we expect too much of policies, and we find out during the time it's implemented that, well, we might have had too high expectations, or is it the way of implementing? What is the problem? Should we have a new relationship with policy? Should that maybe try to find other ways of protecting the sea and the coastal shores?
Well, excuse me. I think from my point of view, that's exactly right, that there's been over many years a growing expectation that policies will be developed, that governments will take action, that government agencies will take on the role of making sure everything's all right. But I think we can see in a myriad of different areas in society that we cannot put that responsibility onto governments or onto public agencies entirely, and it's up to the public to actually take their own initiatives to do what they can to maintain the environment and to ensure that they don't damage it. And I think that plays to the point about increased ocean literacy or increased environmental literacy more broadly, to ensure that we are aware of what damage we can do and make every effort to ensure that we minimize that damage.
Okay, many thanks, Mike. And I also would like to point out to the audience that it might be interesting to them to see how the public is already getting engaged with the ocean. And in one of the work packages, an inventory of innovative solutions, bottom-up approaches have been made for all over Europe to see what kind of initiatives are already going on. So maybe that's also interesting for people to have a look at. And now I have a question for Laura, and that's from Anna Zivian. And she says, perhaps this will still be addressed, but I'm wondering how this work will integrate into the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. Laura, may I give the floor to you?
Thank you to Anna, and also for all her work on the Future Earth Ocean Can. I think there's a bunch of different ways that we can integrate. One is that even though this is a research agenda for Europe, a number of the areas that we've highlighted could easily go to other countries, and not just developed countries, but to lower and middle income countries. And in particular, I would like to highlight, as you all know, that some of the poorest and most stressed, both health-wise and environmentally, populations in the world live in coastal areas in lower and developing nations. So I think one issue is trying to use some of the work that we've been doing that has been very focused on Europe and try to apply this to other countries. And there are a lot of different mechanisms to do that, and the Ocean Decade is one of them. I guess another thing that the whole Ocean Decade has highlighted for me, and I'm a physician and epidemiologist, and I've spent now almost 30 years working in the space of oceans and human health, is that we really need to bring the health community into the Ocean Decade. And frankly, I personally don't see a lot of the health community except for a handful of individuals. So I think, for example, the fact that UNESCO is pushing the Ocean Decade, that we have the SDGs that do cross both environment and health writ large, that these are all ways that we can start to bring in these communities to both try to combine their policies, as a number of our experts have already indicated, both globally and locally, but also just the expertise and the evidence and the points of view of people who represent both the environment and human populations.
Okay, many thanks, Laura. So you're actually stressing also the importance of community building, of getting a stronger representation of the health society community into these type of networks. I have another question, Katja, for you from Maaike Baun. How can we talk about sustainable seafood when most parts of our oceans are already overfished?
Yeah, thank you for this question. We should manage fisheries in a very different way, and one of the reasons you might have seen it that we put in shellfish and not fish in the example. So there are a few things we should fight, all the things like illegal fishing, unreported fish that is sold under the table. These things should really be addressed. And the other part is that we should go to species that are low in the food web. So think seaweed, think bivalves, because you can harvest far more bivalves than you can have fish with a similar impact on the environment. So I think we have to shift our diet from tuna to mussels. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That is, I think, a shift. During the workshops, we experienced that in quite a few regions, there's a very strong attachment to seafood as part of the cultural heritage. So I think that is also something that you might need to take into account if you want to try to make a shift in food consumption. Mike, I would like to turn over to you because I also have a question from Stéphane Isoire. And he asks you, you called for an integrated human health, ocean and economy policy. And do you mean that the integrated maritime policy does not include the human health dimension?
Yes. Well, I understand the sort of flavour of where that question is coming from, because of course in some dimensions it does. But one of the things that our group in the European Centre for Environment and Human Health conducted was a survey of what was happening in coastal towns and villages around the UK. And I'm sure it's different in other countries, but maybe not that different. And there's been a massive decline in those communities. I mean, the number of people has increased, but the economic status of those communities has gone down very badly indeed. And whilst the governments, not just the UK government, but governments around Europe, have been interested in fisheries policies and in offshore energy and in oil exploration and those kind of areas, and the benefits that that brings to communities in terms of wealth and job creation, health and well-being of communities, I think that far less attention has been paid to how do we revitalize, rejuvenate, restore the communities that are in these coastal areas. And very often the environment hasn't played a very important part in that, the marine environment and all its other dimensions. For example, you'll see in the SRA report, some publications are cited showing that people of different socioeconomic groups report better health in coastal areas than they do in other places. And yet we've not really seen that being integrated into policies from government to see how that could be managed more effectively, to see how you can boost economically deprived areas and bring them up to higher standards, integrating both the economic aspects of the marine environment with the environmental aspects, by which I mean blue spaces and all the activities that can go on in blue spaces that foster health and well-being. I hope that sort of explained what I was coming from.
Many thanks, Mike. I have another question for you. Sorry, you're still having quite a busy job. That's from Kevin Davison, and he asks you how might formal and informal education be used effectively to advance the strategic research agenda from Arising, Sophie?
That's a really, really interesting question. I think an awful lot of our efforts so far have been put on the informal aspects, and clearly there are a variety of groups, sort of conservation groups and people who are interested in doing citizen science who've made a very large contribution to increasing ocean literacy. But whether it's possible to integrate more awareness of the oceans into school curricula, for example, or into various parts of more advanced courses that wouldn't typically have an ocean and human health element in, for example, medical students, is an interesting question, and it's one that probably needs debating and discussing in much greater detail. When one considers the importance of the oceans to our planet and the health of our planet and the health of our people, and the global migration that's taken place over the last 50 or 100 years, people moving to live more closely by the coast, then I think it is important that perhaps this should start to be included in some aspects anyway, in school curricula and in other courses.
Thank you, Mike. Maybe Sam, you also want to comment on this question, because I think you raised the issue of education in your presentation as well.
Absolutely, but I think even like on the broader scale, I think what Sophie and the research agenda is trying to do really is not really to say how things should be done, like really, but more to provide a new lens on how to see the ocean and our relationship with the ocean. And I like the fact that without the ocean, we would not be there. And in a way, you know, we don't have the answer. We are just providing keys on what needs to be done. And that's also true for the education aspect. I think we have to think about what needs to be taught to whom, and to ensure that we're going to have the benefits we want, which is a healthy ocean and a healthy human. And that goes hand in hand. So in a way, I think the education goes beyond school, beyond. I think you have to talk to everybody in a smart way and in a targeted way. You want to be sure that when you communicate to someone, you speak the right language. But basically, what we did as a group, and for me, it was really inspiring because I'm not coming at all from the human health perspective, was really providing me with a new way of seeing my science. And say, actually, I can make an impact. The thing I do is relevant for human health, like through this lens and this lens. So I think that's what we try to achieve, and I think we made a great job. I'm really proud of being part of this group because we provided some keys, like some keys on how to see the world and how to make, you know, the relationship between the ocean and our health better in both directions. We need to keep the ocean healthy, and the ocean will keep us healthy too.
Thank you, Sam. I think that we are almost coming to a close right now. Time is running really fast, so I have to apologize to some of the participants whose questions we couldn't answer. I would like to finish off with one final question that comes from Dania Abdul Malak, and that is to Laura. And maybe you can address that question, Laura, and then also go over to the closing remarks of the webinar. The question that Dania is asking is that between the different services to be extracted from the sea for the sake of human health, where does Sophie put the accent on the trade-offs? So I think the negative impacts have already been a topic of discussion, but maybe you can give us your thoughts on it as well, Laura.
So, I mean, I think, Sophie, thank you for this question. And I guess I would echo a little bit of what Sam was saying. I don't have the answer for that. I think what we're trying to point out is that there are risks and benefits from interacting with the oceans, that anything we do to the ocean will result in new risks and benefits. So there's a big piece in terms of monitoring and continuing to monitor and look at those data as we move forward. But there's another huge piece in interacting, as has already been said, with local communities. My trade-off area may be very different from someone who's literally living in a small tropical island with rising seas. And I think that voice has to be heard in terms of the trade-offs, and realizing that trade-offs will change over time with new information, but also this is a very fast moving area because of climate and other environmental change, and just because humans were constantly changing and impacting our environments. So I guess what we're trying to say is there are ways to go forward. As Sam has said, we try to provide direction and keys and questions, but we also have tried not to be prescriptive in terms of how to do it. It's rather a way forward and to get started in a more collaborative, co-creative way. I guess it's up to me to say thank you to all of us, to our 3 speakers and all of the expert group. I also want to thank Suzanne and our RIVM colleagues who actually have gone to the physical plant of RIVM just so they could host this conference. The European Marine Board has led the strategic research agenda that involved our experts and input from all of the partners. All the SOPHIE partners, there's a huge amount of really interesting, useful evidence that's scoping out oceans and human health. Please go to our website on that. All the participants on this conference. I also want to say that we originally had planned to highlight early career researcher participants, and we have asked them, and some of them have already done it, to put up posters, and we'll be putting up posters on our website, and it gives you an idea of the diversity and transdisciplinarity that's already evidenced by the next generation. I want to thank the two artists, and I hope that we'll be able to display some of that on the website and share that with you. And of course, Horizon 2020, who funded this entire project, and we hope will be one of the funders going forward. And just to remind everyone, please send some art, a photo, a poem, music, whatever. The social media hashtag of SOPHIE, SRA, all one word, all caps. And thank you very much, all of you, for spending this past hour with us. It exceeded my expectations already.
Okay, well, thank you, Laura, for these last words. I will now like to close the webinar. Many thanks for all of you asking questions. It was really interesting to hear your thoughts on this. And apologies again for those questions that we couldn't discuss during this limited time. But if you have a question, please feel free to post it on the LinkedIn platform, because that is also a very interesting platform for discussion. And we frequently have a look at it, so we can answer your questions over there. And please check on our website, the report, and also the recordings of this meeting will be posted on the website. So many thanks for you, and I hope you all stay safe, and thank you for joining here today. And thanks to the speakers as well from my side. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.